Hello, my name is Lisa Crosse, and it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Gary Giacomini today. Gary has played a pivotal role at unique points in Marin County's history and has brought qualities that help make enormous change in our county. His intelligence, his intellect, his legal acumen, his eloquence, and personality help facilitate preservation of enormous areas of our county. And so I would like to introduce Gary and ask him a few questions because we feel it's important for the next generation to hear his story firsthand. Gary, please tell us a little bit about your life in Marin County, your early life, and why you have an ethic of public service.
Well, I think I'm one of the few people left around that spent my whole life here. I was born and raised here, in all places Belvedere. But Belvedere then was a very different place than now. It was a it was a railroad town. The trains went down to Tiburon. And we lived in a little house that my folks bought in the Belvedere Lagoon. They bought it for $3,000. It was an Emporium prefab house. And I went to a one-room schoolhouse up on Belvedere Island. And that one teacher taught K through 8, and she would move from row to row, and the fun I used to love was listening in on her teaching the big kids, the 8th graders, when she'd go down the road. You weren't supposed to do that. You were supposed to be doing your homework. So anyway, that's where I was born and raised, and perhaps that experience and watching Belvedere change is what ultimately got me into politics. Belvedere was a sleepy, as I say, one-room schoolhouse, etc., and then all of a sudden it burgeoned and it turned into what it now is, a very high wealth area. Thousands of houses down that peninsula. When I was a kid, they were all dairy ranches, all down that peninsula, and it was perhaps that experience of watching that change that later, years and years later, got me to say, I think I got to take a turn at this to make sure this county doesn't turn into places like San Mateo or something where you only can tell the communities apart by the road signs, as you go down the. But I think that watching sorry for this, watching Belvedere go had a lot to do with me saying I'm just going to do whatever I can not to have the rest of the county have that happen later. You asked how I developed an ethic of public service. My father was a band leader in the 40s. He had big swing bands, and they went out, and he was working for a title company part-time and things like that, really looking for a job, and somebody either died or moved or retired or whatever from the county recorder's office, and my father ran for that office countywide. He won by 9 votes.
Wow.
And the campaign consisted of my mother and father sitting around the living room, handwriting little notes to every voter in the county. Of course, it was a very small place then. It had less voters. The whole county had less voters then than, by far, than a supervisor district has today. Indeed. So I think maybe that probably had quite a bit to do with it. I watched my dad go do that and become the county recorder, and he had that position for some 40 years. And there's that, and then my own childhood, I always was fooling around with politics. I was always, the class president, or ultimately I was a student body president of St. Mary's College and things like that. So in my own little way, in schools, I always thought I want to have a turn to try and do this and do that. So I had done that on my own, and then when my dad ran for a countywide seat, that brought me in contact with all kinds of other people that held office at the time and all that, and it sort of set the stage for maybe I'll do that someday.
Very good. And what was the first office that you ran for, and what motivated you to undertake that effort?
The first office I ran for was the Lagunitas School Board, and that was at a time of fraught with all kinds of intrigue and danger, if you will. His little Lagunitas School District. First, why did I do that? Well, because I had 2 kids in the school, and I mean that was it. And my wife Andrea later was on that same school board many years later. As was my daughter-in-law Susie years later. So we've had at least 3 of us, maybe 4, been on the school board. Yeah. So that was my first elected political office, was the Lagunitas School Board, and they were trying to decide the future of the school, and it was very antagonistic. Change always is, and I've found, especially in small rural communities, it's even harder. Mm-hmm. And there was a proposal to have 3 kinds of classes, if you will, and let the parents choose which ones for their kids. And oh my Lord, when we'd have school board meetings, there'd be 400 and 500 people there, because the conservatives especially were afraid that the wackos were taking over the school district, the communists were infiltrating, and
this is the famous open classroom.
The famous
right?
open classroom was the most controversial, wherein you let students have a lot to say about their own pace and all that. Well, to standard people, I mean, conventional people, that was anathema, right? They weren't sitting in rows, nice little rows doing it. So there was a huge controversy, and I can't remember. I can't believe this. I can't remember the exact vote, but it was a split vote. They created the 3 of them. I think it was 3-2, but it might have been 4-1. That launched, and the promise to the community was equal commitment of resources to the 3 programs, and one was open, whereas the opponents saw it as they'd just be freewheeling around, probably doing a lot of drugs and all that. I mean, that was the accusation. That wasn't what was happening. All the way to one program was really strict. I mean, they sat with their hands folded in the classroom. They didn't quite, but they almost spanked the kids with rulers. I mean, it was as far as you go. And then a middle one, that was sort of, it was a middle road to go. And so it was an interesting time to be on a school board. Believe me, because we set the destiny really of the school system in the valley for decades to come, and it's still got remnants of those early decisions.
The open classroom is still a beloved program.
Yeah, it is.
Indeed.
So those were exciting days. So I was there 68. I was elected in 68, and then things were happening at the county that freaked me out.
Tell us a little bit about what was going on.
They had a countywide plan that envisioned freeways from Santa Fe all the way to Point Reyes, and the freeways would come across the ridges in the valley. And there was they had drawings of the Marin County Planning Department, sketches of shopping centers, etc., in the valley, and they had renditions of schematics of the new Talpiot School District, which took shape in a way. That's on the property owned later by the Flander Ottolini family, and they sold, I think, 60 acres, maybe 100 acres to the Tam School District. And the Tam School District, sent in fleets of D6s and leveled that whole field, took off 8 or 10 feet of topsoil and stockpiled it, ready to build this big, school at the foot of White's Hill.
And that's the pad that we see.
That's the pad. And the pad is all the topsoil that was scraped off of that ranch and put there. Wow. That was the first, that was the first evidence of the build out that was going to come in the valley. And I just couldn't stand it. The then supervisor of this area was a fellow named Bud Barr. He was from Santa Fe, and he was very supportive of all the wide open development of West Marin, not just San Geronimo Valley, but all of West Marin. It's hard to imagine, but at the time there was 1.1 million building sites under the zoning. 1.1 million building sites west of White's Hill, all over here, all over the San Geronimo Valley, and all the way out to Point Reyes, etc. I mean, it's hard to imagine that, But that was what I had just become a partner in a law firm called Freitas, which law firm is still in the county. And that was my lifelong ambition as an adult. The lifelong ambition was to get in that firm, and then in that firm to become a partner. I became a partner, and then a year later I decided to run for the Board of Supervisors, and I thought my poor father was going to commit suicide, because he had put me through college and law school, and his dream was that I'd become an attorney. And in his view, I was throwing it all away to run for the Board of Supervisors, which he thought was a gang of crooks, and they were his boss, which meant when I got elected, I ended up to be one of his bosses. That was interesting.
Yes.
And now today, my son is my boss. Life is got interesting quirks. But he thought I was a fool, just an absolute fool. I thought I had to do this to save the county, and I ran in a slate with Barbara Boxer, and our slogan was "Save Marin." And there's life interesting again, right? Yeah. I won, she lost, and now she's a United States Senator, right?
Amazing.
And so, but we ran together as a slate, and fortunately, when I got elected, I joined 2 other very good votes on the board, and we were able to do some very good things and reverse all those plans to have massive development out here.
Tell us a little bit more about that. What about A60 zoning and the implications?
The key proposal was, and it was the battleground for my first election in 1972, was the concept of A60 zoning, which was you had to have 60 acres for one unit, one house. Now, if you would do that, that's going to be the end of what then was all the planned subdivision development.
This 1.1 million.
Yeah, 1.1 million was reduced if you applied A60 everywhere in the western part of the county, which we later did. The reduction was from 1.1 million to 3,600 total units in all of West Marin. And they, in turn, were focused inside the existing communities. And all the sprawling ranch lands were slated for A60. 1 unit per 60 acres, which really effectively meant that there wouldn't be subdivision development. And that was the battle of the election in '72 when I first ran. The fellow that I ran, there were 5 people running. They all opposed A60 but myself, which then was called a communist plot too. A60 was, at the time, the concept was supported by 2 of the county supervisors and opposed by 3, and the evolving countywide plan was coming along while the elections of '72 were waged. My opponent in the end, when it was down to 2, was a fellow named Mike Peavy, who now is the executive director of the California Public Utilities Commission. And he was adamantly opposed to A60. Said it was confiscatory and unconstitutional, etc. Where I looked at it as it would save West Marin, because if we adopted it, then we could get rid of all the designs for freeways, etc., because there wouldn't be the necessity for infrastructure if you were only going to have 3,000 houses instead of 1.1 million. So there was a fierce battle. I can't remember exactly, but I think I probably won by about 300 or 400 votes.
Wow. Tell us about your family's history and how it affected the ranchers out in West Marin, the proposal of A60 zoning.
But all the ranchers, and I would have done the same thing if I was a rancher, were vigorously opposed to A60. Their assets, the ranchers' assets then and are now in the land, and they had worked the land for many of them for generations, and agriculture was beginning to fail, and they were going to their economic ship was going to come in, so to speak. They had played by the rules the way they saw it, and now it was time to subdivide, etc. And they had all in effect decided to leave agriculture and to sell the ranches, and there was going to be lots of developments like there were on the other side of the hill where Terra Linda is and San Marin and all that. That was the plan. So the ranchers, they all were for any of my opponents, and the only ones that didn't support my opponents were my blood relatives, but they did not support me because I was supporting A60, but they didn't give my opponent their names. That was their courtesy. But they, understandably, one of my cousins, Walter Giacomini, had in the planning department plans on file, which were perfectly permissible until I came along, for a marina, a huge marina like the Belvedere Lagoon in Point Reyes. And so that was all perfectly permissible under the then zoning. When we downzoned that ranch later when I was on the board on a 3-2 vote, hardest vote of my whole life, he went from 2,000 to 3,000 units to 7. And that family didn't speak to me for a long, long time. Wow. And I don't blame them. I mean, I would have been the same if I were them. People often say they worry about money in politics, and I think that money can be a problem in terms of influencing votes. But my own experience has always been that the toughest influences on you are relationships. If you have a close relationship with people, let alone blood relationship, that is very hard then to go against what their desires are. Much harder than if somebody gave you a nice campaign contribution like $1,000 or something. I never had the slightest issue with that. I would just say, you invested in me, and I hope pretty much I've fulfilled your expectations. But on this one, I disagree with you. So see you later. So I've never in my time was I think, oh my God, I got to vote for this because somebody gave me a campaign contribution. But many, many times I felt under enormous pressure because of friendships that I was going against what friends or relatives wanted for their own destiny, which they had the right to do. Those were always the hardest votes by far.
And I understand that your colleagues on the board were divided, and there was a very pivotal board meeting. That first decision.
Well, the family had a meeting out in Point Reyes, all the Giacominis. And there must have been 50 or 60 in a room at Walter's house, in a big living room, and they sat around. And I remember my cousin Walter saying, "Gary, blood is thicker than water, for God's sake." And they weren't even asking me to vote for them. They wanted me to leave the room. They were simply saying, "Just don't vote. Just say that it's a conflict because it's family, and don't vote, and we'll take care of the votes." Now, the reason that's what they wanted was because it took 3 votes to change the zoning. And they had 2 votes. The family had 2 votes. Well, virtually all the ranchers did. The A60 was, when it was voted on and implemented, it was always on 3-2 votes. So if I were to leave the room, then it would be 2-2. And then they would have kept their zoning because there wouldn't have been the votes to overturn it. So the way they saw it, they weren't asking me very much. They weren't asking me to vote against my conscience. I remember I said, how could I possibly not rezone your ranch when we've marched across the county? By then we'd rezoned hundreds of ranches, I would say. And then we're marching along, and now it's their turn. How could I have voted for A60 on all these other ranches and then come to them and say, not for you? They said, no, we understand, so we're not asking you to do that. We're just asking you to take yourself out as a conflict. And so I said, no, I'm sorry, I can't. So that was very hard. Very, very, very hard. And they were mad at me for a long time, for years. And I appreciate their anger and their resentment. Now, we've all gotten close since then, but at the time it was terrible.
And in the long term, how did it play out with property values? Everybody assumed it was going to devalue the property.
That's right. So if you're these ranchers sitting there and they think one day I can have several thousand, I can sell the land with the zoning that allows several thousand houses, and the next day I got a half a dozen. Guess what's happened to my value? You've just impoverished me, by a stroke of the zoning pen. And everybody thought, including us, the county, that the effect of A60 would be to depreciate the value. There was no doubt about it, in our view, and in the ranchers' view, and in everybody's view. And so that was the expectation, and we were concerned about litigation, and the county council at the time, or all the time I was there, named Doug Maloney, said he thought he could defend it, and but it wasn't a slam dunk. It might have been a taking. It was too far. The zoning was too far. He was the one that said A60 as the farthest I'll go. There were people that wanted it to be higher, like A100 or A200. And he felt that couldn't stand legal challenge. Now, what happened was, and with that backdrop, as the years went on, first afterwards there was scores of lawsuits to overturn our zoning, and they worked their way ultimately to the United States Supreme Court. Took about 10 years in a case called Baranczyk, which is an Acacia case. And by then, a phenomenal thing had happened. It turns out that now what had happened is it's the law of supply and demand. So you didn't have near as many development rights, but what you had was worth a fortune because there were so few. So what happened to everybody's surprise was A60 land was selling for big bucks because wealthy people, so wealthy people come along and say, I can buy a ranch here for the price of a lot in Tiburon, have 1,000 acres and a few houses, etc. So what happened is, after a while, the ranchers began to see that the values hadn't been swept clean. I mean, that they still had some very good values. And also, other things we developed at the same time allayed their fears, like the creation of MALT, Marine Agricultural Land Trust, which provides a vehicle in which the ranchers get compensation, and the MALT buys the development rights. The ranching family that's there on the land is able to satisfy their cousins, etc., that aren't on the land by giving them some money. They get some money, and the operating ranchers stay on the land forever. So there was a lot of forces going on at the same time, and the net effect of it was that because the values stayed well above expectations, the lawsuits frittered away because they didn't have damages. You see, by the time
they hadn't lost their value.
They hadn't lost value. So that worked out okay, but nobody thought it would. Nobody, including me, thought it would. We thought it was going to depreciate the value of the land, but that was the price that it would take to hold on to this county and preserve it the way that it was forever. And that was a price that we thought we were willing to pay. But thankfully what happened is it still kept its value.
And at the same time, you were working hard to preserve agriculture. Isn't that right? Through some programs that supported the ranchers and water quality.
When we did the first thing we did was the zoning, the A60 zoning, and we did that the first 2 years I was in office. And I said to the ranchers, when we're done with the zoning, which they hated us for, hated is an understatement. I said, we're going to do some things that show we're not just here trying. They were screaming at me, you're just zoning us to the Stone Age. That's what you're doing. You're zoning so all your little rich people friends from over the hill can drive by and say pointed a cow. And we're expected to bear that, your open space. And I said, I promise we'll do things that will enhance you and agriculture. And over time we did. And so by the time I ran for re-election the first time in 4 years, I'd gone through hell with the ranchers. They hated me. By the time I ran again, they all supported me because we developed programs that paid the average ranch close to $1 million to build dairy pollution barns that would keep the manure on the ranch and keep it from going into the creeks, etc. And we, the county, would pay toward the construction of them, and they couldn't believe that we would do that. We also went to Sacramento, and so did the citizens, conservation groups, and testified in favor of milk price increases. Well, that had never been done before, because there's a lot more people that want milk prices to stay cheap than want to. So they said, well, maybe these guys aren't so bad. And then there was a horrible drought, and we commandeered trucks from all over Mendocino and Sonoma County, big water trucks, and we trucked water to the ranches every day from out of the county. Everything was dry here, and Acacia would dried up totally. You could drive across it, and there was no water in the county. We trucked water in 24/7. To the ranches, so they didn't have to slaughter all their cows. Well, all these things made them go, well, this guy, he might be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch, so he does care about us. And so they slowly began to think that I had their interest at heart, and I think that was the most satisfying of my first re-election campaign was that the people that despised me ended up supporting me. That's always it's like sort of like a prodigal son, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you turned him around.
Anyway, that was very rewarding, and to have them feel. What I was trying to teach everybody was, we're all stewards of the same land. Some people are on it and, you know, raise cows. Other people benefit by the open space. Other people by walking on it, yada, yada. But we all have the same thing, you know, and we should all have the same goals and not be enemies. Because when I got there, the environmentalists and the ranchers wouldn't talk to each other, wouldn't be in the same room, and I worked really hard at getting them to know each other. And once they know each other and know their kids and other grandkids, the hatred starts to dissipate, you know.
They see what's in common.
So it worked. That by a combination of things, it worked out. Now, I was blessed, always blessed. You know, one thing is really important for people to understand: no one person in office does things on their own. I mean, I really want people to understand that I didn't run around and save the county. I was helpful. I was a catalyst, and all of West Marin, thankfully, was in my district, so I could speak with sort of some authority. But if I didn't have the support at the board of supervisors, nothing would have come of it. It would have been a joke. I would have been an asterisk politically. Do you see? If I didn't have colleagues that supported these concepts.
Who were those colleagues?
Well, the two key ones were Pete Aragoni, who's still with us, and another great supervisor named Michael Warnham. He later went on to the state legislature, to the assembly, and he has since died. But Warnham and Peter and I were the three that did A60, for example. Now, on other issues like trucking water and helping build the pollution-controlled barns, etc., we had the whole board did. They saw the economics of that. We also, the time was so right. Today we couldn't do what I did. Let me explain. When I got this idea about helping the ranchers build these dairy barns, because they were all giving up the hope when they found out all these rules by state water quality, they were going to sell the ranches and get out. And I had to move very fast to convince them that no, hope wasn't lost. And I thought the best way to do that was for the county to participate in money and help build these, design and build these facilities. So I raced on the agenda, if you can believe this, of the Board of Supervisors, off agenda. It wasn't even on the Friday agenda that went out. On Monday, I raced around to the supervisors and handed them this 3-page proposal, and the first installment was, say, $2.8 or $3.8 million. Many millions more were needed, and we adopted that.
Out of your budget, or?
Well, remember now, this is before Prop 13. So, at the time, what one needed at the Board of Supervisors to do a thing was 3 votes, and then what happened automatically, the tax rates went up. You didn't, and it's inconceivable today.
Illegal
so today you couldn't do these things. One, of course, you couldn't walk in off agenda and say, "Oh, I got this idea for a few $million," right? People would string you up. Second, there's no money. There's no money. You could have the best idea in the world, and you go in there and you wouldn't have any money. Nobody has any money. The state doesn't have money. The county doesn't have money. You know. So that's another thing. In addition to, I was blessed always with luck in my colleagues and the staff, and timing. The ability to have those resources. All of that stopped in 1978 when Prop 13 passed, because boom, the property taxes were cut in half by 54%, and you couldn't go do stuff like that. You couldn't do new programs. Never have since. So you see, I was lucky and blessed. So Marin was saved by a combination of people and good fortunes. Do you see what I mean?
I understand.
And I was like the hood ornament to that. But I did alone. I would have been nothing. You know. And it's really important. Nothing offends me more than watching politicians, including me, if I'm not careful, acting like we did something by the other day. I did this. I did that. it's never that. I mean, if you take it on a big level, right, like Congress of the United States, you know, hundreds of people that have to participate, you know, to pass a bill, for example. But so I get mad at people individually claiming that they did this or did that, and I get mad at myself when I forget to point out that it's because of the support of colleagues that things were possible.
Speaking of amazing teamwork, tell us about the coming of national parks to Marin County, 2 national parks, and your role, the Board of Supervisors' role.
Well, it started back in the Kennedy era when the seashore was created, the Point Reyes seashore was created, and I either 62 or 63, I think 62.
Like 62.
Small, it was small, maybe 15,000 acres, the beginning of the Point Reyes National Seashore. Here, come here. You're not speaking either. So that, you know, that set the stage for a park in Marin County. And then events came along that were, once again, the fortune of people in the right place at the right time. Recently, there's been a lot of concern about Marin, like, well, what congressional district are we going to be in? Oh, we want to be allied here, we want to be allied there. I want to say, it doesn't matter what the lines are. It matters who's the office holder. So we had, at the time, Marin was in congressional district split with San Francisco, but the congressman was John Burton. His brother was Phil Burton. It was extremely powerful. And so we expanded the parks in leaps and bounds when in those days, which again, you couldn't do that today. And Phil Burton would move millions of acres at a time and across the nation into the parks. And
a series of legislative actions?
Yes, but it was absolutely stunning how these things came about. Phil Burton, who was very, very powerful, missed becoming Speaker of the House by just 1 vote. Wanted his little brother John to be in Congress, and he wanted him to stay in Congress. So he would sprinkle his largesse over here. So when John said to me, well, what would be a good thing to do in Congress? I said, expand the parks. So we would expand the parks, like 20, 25,000 acres, and I'd go to Washington and with John, I'd meet John and Phil, and we'd go out with a few drinks, and Phil would clear the table, and we would write on the tablecloth with big felt pens and draw, and mistakes were made. One time we did a bill that mistakenly put the town of Point Reyes in the park, and we had to retreat out of that very fast. Now, those bills were sometimes appended to, like, I remember one was appended to a nursing home bill. Had nothing to do with it. Again, you couldn't do any of this today. But so sometimes there were no hearings, there were nothing. All of a sudden, the Point Reyes Seashore was expanded by 25,000 acres, right?
Wow.
On some bill that he had hopscotched onto.
Did the Board of Supervisors take actions related to the creation of the parks or expansion?
When John Burton said to me, I don't know, I can't follow all the detail of what land should be in or out of the park. You know all this, and locally, you hold hearings. He asked me to have the Board of Supervisors hold hearings. Have all the witnesses come in, draw me a bill. So we did for months. We had everybody come in, and then he issued a press release saying that I'm going to do a final bill to expand the seashore and GGNRA, I think, at the same time. And the Board of Supervisors has agreed to hold hearings and conduct the preliminary boundary changes. And so we did, and we did that, and we put ranches in and out, and we also established the condition of the ranches could stay in agriculture if they went in the park, as long as they did so in an environmentally proper way, and didn't overgraze, etc. So we developed those criteria. Then we would send a packet into Washington, and they never changed the semicolon.
Wow.
Never changed the semicolon. And after a while, the public knew that the action was at the Board of Supervisors, so they would come by the hundreds, because they knew that would end up being what the bill was.
Were they happy about it, or were they angry?
Well, it depends. It depends who. My same cousin Waldo wanted his ranch to be in the park. Many people wanted it not to be because it was such a good producing dairy. This is in Point Reyes. And so I didn't put it in, much to his dismay. So he was very mad, and in the end, Waldo went to Phil Burton. He had him over one night. Went to Phil Burton and said, your brother and my cousin wouldn't put my goddamn ranch in the park, so I want the ranch in the park. So I got a call here in the middle of the night. It was Waldo, my cousin, saying, "Would you know Phil Burton if I put him on the phone?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, this guy came here, but he was in a green decal car from the park, and he says he's Phil Burton, and he's going to put my ranch in the park, but I don't know if it's him or it's some." So I said, "Put him on the phone," and it was midnight or 2 in the morning, and he said, "I'm going to put this. I am going to Oregon with the park. Phil Burton." And I got to go around the corner, and this ranch is the way I'm going to pivot around the corner at the headwaters of Point Reyes, of Tomales Bay.
Wow.
And so even though John didn't put it in and you didn't want it in, I'm putting it in, I want you to know. And he said, "So what does it take for you to shut up and go along with this?" So I said, "Well, then if you're going to do that, then go all the way up the shore of Tomales Bay. Protect the whole thing." Well, which is what he did.
And today that ranch is the crown jewel in the restoration project of
it is
the top of Tomales Bay.
It is
indeed.
But anyway, those were great days. And there's one other vignette I'll never forget when Phil Burton did. So we still wanted some areas to be added, and we wanted all the great lands in the Alima Valley to be added on the east side of Highway 1. See, the west side of Highway 1 was all in the seashore. Well, we had thousands of acres that were being threatened with development. It was under A60, but it would have been those kind of ranchettes,
Estates.
So I went to the Burtons and said, "Oh, we got to have this." And by then they had run out of loot. So Phil said, "I'll find some money." So he found at the time a relatively unknown source or institution, and they were called recreation areas. So he said, they have a bunch of money here. So we'll create we'll call it Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and I said, "Well, we don't want 2 parks." No, I just need it for a cash register. That's where the money is, and we'll swoop along. I can move it probably within 2 weeks, and we'll take all those lands and put them in the park.
Astounding.
And we'll collapse it later, because I said, "Phil, you don't want to cross the street from each other, 2 federal parks, 2 bureaucracies, right?"
Yes.
And he said, "Don't worry, but for now they got the cash, so we'll do that, and then I'll do a trailer bill and merge the 2 in together." Okay. So what happened? He died. So the land was in, but it was in the GGNRA. Now then it developed a constituency. Amy Meyer and all these people with GGN. So they wouldn't let it. So then when with Phil gone, I said, "Oh, by the way, his intent was always, what do you know about his intent?" And it had a whole bureaucracy, right, that ran it, and they liked it. They liked the turf.
They didn't want to give it up.
Who's a great guy that died recently, the superintendent, Brian O'Neill. Brian O'Neill was the superintendent of GGNRA, and then he was alongside of John Sansing, and later, who's the last guy?
Frank Dean.
No. Anyway, the seashore, John Newbacher.
Oh, Don Newbacher.
So here you have 2 superintendents on parks separated by Highway 1.
Yeah.
With different policies and philosophies. On some you can ranch, some you can't. And they both fought it. Both fought merger. So did all the little citizens advisory commissions and everything else. And so today, you have these, this phenomenon of 2 national parks sitting side by side with separate people running it. It's just nonsense. But it all came about because of the way it was created.
Amazing.
Yeah.
At the same time, Marin County was beginning to look at its own open space interests, the county government. Tell us a little about the development of the open space district and its first funding.
Well, the open space district was created on my election day, not because of me, but it was on the ballot in '72, along with my election, same time. So, right when I was elected, we were blessed by having the creation of the open space district, which was then fully funded. Funded, had a lot of money, could buy a lot of open space. So we were going gangbusters then, because between that and the expansion of the great federal parks, we were galloping along at 10 to 20,000 acres a year, adding lands, in one park or another. And we just say, okay, let's see, who should have this one, who should take this? It was a time of plenty. In that, imagine thinking that way now. Today, we want to go put 20,000 acres in.
And I understand Roy's Redwoods was one of the first acquisitions?
It wasn't one of the first, but it was one of my first. By that I mean one of the first that I got to do as supervisor of the 4th District. So the Open Space District created in '72. And first thing we did is we purchased lands that were under great threat over the hill, that were about to be, developed alongside Terralyn and some other. So we went where, quite properly, went where the development pressures were really high. First, I always had in mind we have to get Roy's Redwoods, and everybody said, the board said, yeah, you're fine, but it's not under any. There's no pressure. But eventually there was, and the family was it got under pressure itself for estate taxes and other reasons to have to sell the land. They had been very benign. They had they had never developed anything, So it was like having free open space. But they were going to sell it, and the new people were not going to be benign about it. They would file development proposals. Then the supervisors said, okay, it's your turn. So that's how. So it's the first. Roy's Redwoods is the first purchase over the hill.
West Marin.
In the inland rural corridors. First purchase.